Okay, hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily. Today we are going to be filming my mid-month wrap-up. So this is for my reading between the 1st and the 15th of June, during which time I read 10 books. I only have 9 of them here. This is my stack. I only have 9 here because I lent one to my brother, so he has that one. So yeah, we're just gonna jump into it. Most of these were read for the Queer Lit Readathon, which I took part in during the first week of June. So a lot of these are queer books in some way. Yeah, so let's talk about it. Okay, so the first book that I finished this month was Macbeth by Shakespeare. My boyfriend and I are reading a bunch of these together. We're reading Shakespeare together. We started with Hamlet, or wait, no, we started with Othello and then we read Macbeth and we're doing Hamlet next. So this one I enjoyed. I gave this one like a 3.5, 4 stars. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads because I rounded up. But I don't know, I didn't enjoy this one as much as Othello. I didn't find it as compelling or as interesting as Othello, but it was interesting because I didn't really know anything about this, so it was good to finally read the original material that so much of modern books and TV shows and everything pull from this. So that was interesting, but yeah, I didn't like it as much as Othello, so 3.5 stars. Okay, next I read The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. This book I've talked about in a couple other videos, so I'm not going to talk too much about, but this one is basically about a man named Yale living in Chicago in the 1980s. And it is about him and his friend group living through the AIDS epidemic. It was very sad. It's a very emotional book. There is not much good that happens in here, but all of the characters are so well done. They're all so interesting and unique, and they really feel like real people, which I loved, but it made it so much more emotional because it felt like you were reading about real people going through this, and obviously real people did go through this, which it's all horrible, it's so sad, but I'm really glad I read this. So that's that one. Next is The Black Flamingo by Dean Ada. This is another one that I've talked about in another video, but this is basically, it is a young adult novel and it is written in verse. I don't know if you can see that, and there's also little illustrations throughout it. I listened to the audiobook for this, which was read by the author, which is nice, and it's also a short audiobook because it is in verse, so it's all sort of spoken word poetry, so it goes by really fast when you're listening to it. I expected to love this. I really thought that I was gonna adore this book, but I just didn't. I found it a little disappointing. It is about this boy who lives in England, and he it starts off with him being really young, and it goes through his whole life up through uni, and it just talks about him sort of coming to terms with his sexuality in a black family where he feels like he's not where he won't be accepted for who he is, and so he's dealing with a lot of identity issues. And then when he gets to uni, he discovers the drag community and he joins like a drag club on campus, and that helps him sort of gain confidence and gain a deeper understanding of who he is. And I don't know, all of the marketing for this book talks about his journey to becoming a drag person, like him getting involved in drag, and it's like a big like formative experience for him joining drag, and to some extent that is true, but it also felt sort of secondary to the rest of the story because he doesn't join the drag club or get involved in the drag community at all until almost the end when he's at uni. Most of this is him in childhood and high school, and so I don't know, I just felt a little bit deceived by the marketing of this book, and I also didn't love the writing. I usually like novels written in verse, but this one just didn't gel with me, so I was a little disappointed by this one. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Yeah, I don't really know what about this didn't work for me, but it just didn't, so there's that one. Okay. Next, I read The Night Country by Melissa Albert. This is the sequel to the book The Hazelwood, which I read a couple of months ago. I think I read it in April. And this one is about a girl named Alice who discovers that she, so her grandmother wrote this book of creepy sort of fairy tales, and they're very dark, sinister fairy tales. But she's never met her grandma. She is sort of forbidden from reaching out to her grandma. Her mother won't let her. But then her grandma dies, and so it's about her going to her grandma's estate, which is the Hazelwood, and sort of figuring out some interesting things about herself. And this book picks up a couple of years after the end of the Hazelwood. I gave this one 2 stars. I don't know, I didn't like this one as much as the first one. I didn't think it was necessary. I think the way the Hazelwood ended, it was enough. I don't think we really needed a sequel or a follow-up to it. And I also didn't find this one as interesting. I listened to the audiobook for both this one and the first one, and I don't know, I kept getting distracted listening to this one. Like, I just was not as invested in it as I was the first one. So yeah, this one is definitely, you don't have to read this. Like, if you are happy with the Hazelwood on its own as a standalone, you like the way it ended, just stop there. You don't really need to read this. I don't think it really adds that much to the story, but yeah, I'm a little disappointed by that one. Okay, next I read Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. This one is a graphic memoir about this woman, Alison Bechdel, whose father, she finds out, was a closeted gay man, and so she finds out after his death that he had relations with some of his high school male students, and she also has suspicions that he killed himself, that his death might not have been an accident. So it's just about her sort of examining her relationship with her father and her father's life, trying to gain an understanding of him after his death, because she learned all of these sort of bombshells about him, and so it's just her coming to terms with that and discussing his sexuality in relation to hers, because she is a lesbian, and so she sort of tracks his experience as a gay man and her experience as a gay woman, and the different circumstances they found themselves in. So it was interesting. I don't rate nonfiction books, especially memoirs. I feel weird rating a person's life, so I'm not going to rate this, but I definitely enjoyed it. It was an interesting book, and there is a Broadway musical for this, which I listened to several years ago, but I didn't really know the story or anything. I hadn't read this, I hadn't read anything about it, I just listened to the soundtrack, so I didn't get that much out of it. So I am looking forward to giving it another more intense listen through, I guess. Just giving it sort of the attention it deserves, because I didn't do that before. So yeah, this one was an interesting read. Next, I read Docile by K.M. Spara. This one is a sort of dystopian BDSM book. It's a strange concept for a book. So basically, it is set in Maryland in the near future, where a set of laws were passed making debt an inheritable thing. So debt passes from family member to family member, and people are in insane amounts of debt, and they had no way to pay off this debt. So a thing called docile was invented, and basically people become dociles, become these servants to rich people, and in exchange the rich people pay off their debt. So it is about a boy named, not Alex, Elijah becoming a docile for a man named Alex, and it's just about their relationship, and I enjoyed this. It felt a little bit, I don't know, I don't really like smutty books or books with a lot of sex in them, so I didn't love all of the scenes in here, but it was definitely an interesting story and a compelling story, but there was a lot of sex in here. And I wish it had sort of gone into deeper detail or done a deeper examination on debt and the debt crisis through the lens of this book, but it felt a little secondary to the sexual relationship, so it was fine. It was an interesting read. I listened to the audiobook and I flew through it in just a couple of days. So yeah, I'm glad I read this. I gave this one like 3.5 stars. I rounded up to 4 on Goodreads, but 3.5. Yeah, if you're interested, I recommend picking it up just because it is a strange concept. So if you have any interest in this, I think it's worth a read. But yeah, that's that one. Next, okay, so I actually don't have the next one with me. This is the one that I lent to my brother. But I read The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This one is the third book in a adult fantasy trilogy about a world where basically the Earth is hostile and trying to kill humanity. And so it's just the ways humanity is surviving on this hostile planet. But it has a lot of really great discussions on race and segregation in it. And it does them very well. Like, it never feels preachy or heavy-handed in any way. I think that she used this fantasy story really well as a way to discuss racial issues, which I really enjoyed. And also, aside from that, the storyline is just really interesting. And I thought it was a really satisfying conclusion to the series. I think more often than not, I am sort of let down by the conclusion to a series, but this one I think was really well done. I think it was a good ending. So yeah, it's a great series. I highly recommend it. But I feel like everybody has read that one by now. But yeah, okay. So I gave that one 4 stars. I don't know if I said that. 4 stars. Okay, next I read We Are Water by Wally Lamb. I picked this one up sort of on a whim because I've had it on my shelves forever. I didn't know anything about it, but the audiobook was available on Libby from my library, so I just grabbed it. And I ended up really liking it, and also it fit with the Pride theme for the month. It ended up being about a woman who has gotten divorced from her husband and is now marrying another woman, and it's just about her family coming to terms with that, because that's obviously a big change. And I I think they were married for like 25 years or something, and then they got divorced, and they've been divorced 2 or 3 years, and she's now marrying a woman. And so they have adult kids, and so everybody is sort of shocked by this. One of her children is extremely homophobic, so he goes on a journey of learning to accept his mother in this new way. And yeah, it was really good. I really liked this one. Like I said, I didn't know anything going into it. I only bought this because I had read Wally Lamb's other book, She's Come Undone, and liked that one, so I grabbed this one at a secondhand bookstore, not knowing anything about it, but it was very interesting. I gave this one 3.5 stars, rounded up to 4 on Goodreads, so yeah. Okay, next I read The Help by Catherine Stockett. I gave this one 5 stars. I loved it. I listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by a bunch of Southern women, and throughout the like 4 or 5 days that I was listening to the book, I felt myself slipping into a Southern accent that I don't actually have, but listening to this book nonstop was sort of influencing my own accent, which was a strange experience. But for those of you that don't know, I think everybody knows what this is, but it is set in Jackson, Mississippi in 1962. So like right in the middle of all of the civil rights movement stuff going on, especially in the South. And this is deep South Mississippi. So it follows several families, several white rich families and their black maids. One of the women is just back from college, and she wants to be a writer, and she decides that she wants to tell the story of the black maids because their side of the story is never told, and especially with the civil rights movement heating up, it is a very timely subject. So she starts interviewing black maids about their white employers, and the way they are mistreated, or the way, like, the good and the bad about it, basically. And yeah, it was really good. I really enjoyed this. I loved all of the characters. I thought they were very well done. It was very well written. And after I finished it, I watched the movie the same day I finished this because I had never seen the movie, and it was really good as well. So yeah, that one. I gave that one 4.5, 5 stars. Okay. The last book I read in the first half of June was Trumpet by Jackie Kay. This book is about a man named Joss Moody, who was a famous trumpet jazz musician. He played trumpet. And it is about, so he dies, basically. He dies, and after he dies, an autopsy is done, and they discover that he was a trans female to male man. So it is just about everybody learning that he was trans, and nobody had been prepared for this. The only person that knew in his life was his wife. And it's mostly about his son coming to terms with this, and his son is very angry about it. He feels sort of blindsided, and I don't know, he just is very shocked by it, and he takes out this shock by being angry at everybody about it. And so he is approached by a journalist who wants to write sort of an expose tell-all about Joss, and she's horrible. She's the worst. It was such a frustrating book to read because this journalist is just such a terrible person. Throughout the whole book, she's basically, she conducts these interviews where she's basically trying to get the interviewees to talk about how disgusting they think it is that Joss was trans, and she asks all of these leading questions, and like she's definitely trying to spin the story that it was wrong of Joss to hide the fact that he was trans, and it's horrible. Throughout the book, she misgenders Josh. She calls him she the entire book, which is just so frustrating. She calls him by his birth name, and she is trying to influence Joss's son to do the same, trying to get the son to give her basically material for this horrible book, and he's working with her for some of the book, and then he sort of goes off on his own and works through his issues surrounding this information that he has received. So yeah, it was an interesting book. It's also short. It didn't take me very long to read. It was very interesting. Like I said, I don't know if I liked this book. I gave it 3 stars. I think it was well written, but like I said, it was just such an infuriating book to read, just because the reporter and the son are just so frustrating. They're so ignorant and so just angry the entire book, so it was really hard to read, but it was well written. So I gave this one 3 stars, but it's definitely a good book. So if you have any interest in this, I think it is worth the read. So yeah, those are the 10 books that I read in the first half of June. I had a pretty good reading month. Most of them were kind of middle of the road for me. I didn't really love any of them except for The Help. I really enjoyed that one, but I didn't hate anything I read in the first half of the month, so that's good. That's always good. Yeah, that is all I have for you today. Let me know your favorite read of June so far. I would love to hear it. Let me know if you've read any of these and we can talk about them. And yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.
I've been dreaming all night, bringing me some inspiration. Never meant to love no one, but baby, I saw you for a second and I'm happy that you came my way. Don't wanna waste no time without you ever brightening up my days. Never meant to fall so